An elderly woman stepped into an upscale restaurant, hoping to enjoy a meal in a place filled with memories. But instead of being welcomed, she was harshly turned away by the staff, deemed unworthy of being there. No one knew who she really was, until the next day, when shocking news spread like wildfire. The restaurant faced an intense public backlash, and its employees were left in deep regret. What exactly happened? And why did they break down in tears when they learned the truth? That night, the city lights twinkled, casting a golden glow over the streets. In a bustling part of town stood an elegant restaurant, La Violette, a place where only the wealthy and influential dined. It was known for its impeccable service, high-end cuisine, and guests who arrived dressed in designer outfits. Across the street, an elderly woman slowly made her way toward the restaurant, clutching an old, worn-out bag. Her clothes were simple and faded, her shoes barely holding together. She stopped in front of the restaurant, her eyes lighting up as she read the menu posted outside. Her name was Mrs. Agnes. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her courage and stepped inside. The moment the glass doors swung open, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations hushed, and every eye turned toward her. A waitress named Sophie quickly approached, her expression stiff. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone cold. "I'd like to order dinner," Mrs. Agnes replied gently. Sophie gave her a quick once-over, her lips curling slightly in disapproval. The woman's worn-out clothes didn't belong in a place like this. Nearby customers exchanged whispers, some chuckling under their breath. "I'm sorry, but this restaurant requires reservations and a proper dress code," Sophie said, feigning politeness. Mrs. Agnes offered a small smile. "I just want to enjoy one meal here. I have the money to pay." She reached into her bag and pulled out a few bills, but Sophie barely glanced at them. "I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight," she said flatly, despite the obvious empty tables in the back. At that moment, the restaurant manager, Mr. Daniel, stepped in. His voice was firm. "I have to ask you to leave, ma'am. Our establishment upholds certain standards, and we need to ensure the comfort of our guests." A few patrons snickered. Others simply looked away. Mrs. Agnes met their gazes, one by one. Her small smile faded, and after a moment of silence, she turned and slowly walked out. No one realized they had just made a terrible mistake. The next morning, a headline took over the news. Elderly war mother rejected from restaurant where her late son once worked. Social media exploded. People were furious. Reporters uncovered the heartbreaking truth: Mrs. Agnes was not just any elderly woman. She was the mother of a fallen soldier. Her son, Michael, had once been a promising young chef at La Violette. He dreamed of becoming the restaurant's head chef someday. He worked tirelessly in that very kitchen before enlisting in the military to serve his country. Sadly, he never came home. Since his passing, Mrs. Agnes had longed to visit the place where her son had worked, where he had once cooked with passion and spoken so fondly of his dreams. She had finally gathered the courage to go, hoping to feel closer to him. Instead, she was humiliated and thrown out. The restaurant became the target of massive public outrage. Online comments poured in. "This is disgusting. A grieving mother treated like this? Shame on them. They owe her an apology. This is beyond heartless. Imagine if that was your mother." A former employee was interviewed on live TV. "Michael used to talk about his mom all the time," he said. "He once told me that if she ever came to the restaurant, he'd cook something special just for her. But now, she came, and they kicked her out?" The restaurant staff panicked. They had no idea that their cold treatment of one woman would come back to haunt them. Desperate to make things right, Mr. Daniel and a few employees tracked down Mrs. Agnes's address. But when they arrived, a neighbor met them with heartbreaking news. Mrs. Agnes had passed away the night before. Her health, already fragile, had worsened after that humiliating experience. She had gone home alone, sat in her old chair, and looked at a photograph of her son, then peacefully drifted off in her sleep, never to wake again. In her hands, she still clutched that same photograph, a picture of her and Michael, smiling together in the restaurant's kitchen. Mr. Daniel lowered his head, his throat tightening. Sophie and the others stood frozen, the weight of their actions crashing down on them. They had lost their chance to make amends. No apology would ever reach her now. As a small tribute, La Violette placed a commemorative plaque at a corner table where Michael once worked. It read, "For Michael and his mother, Mrs. Agnes, two people who should have always been welcome here." But it was too late. This story serves as a powerful reminder. We never truly know who we are dealing with or what burdens they carry. The person we look down on today might have a story of unimaginable strength, sacrifice, and love. The stranger we dismiss might be carrying a heart full of memories and pain. If only the restaurant staff had taken a moment to listen, to show kindness, and to treat Mrs. Agnes with dignity, they wouldn't have to live with this regret. Never judge someone by their appearance. Because sometimes, the people we underestimate are the ones who deserve the most respect.